Thank you very much, members of the media, for coming up this afternoon. Thank you very much, members of the national community, for paying attention. It's been a long 24 hours, but fortunately, we can breathe a sigh of relief. It could have been worse, because this afternoon, our forecast was for more rain, and it would certainly have made a very bad situation considerably worse. What is happening in Trinidad and Tobago at this time? A few days ago, the Met Office drew our attention to a weather system that was building up in our vicinity. And the forecast was that the ITCZ, which is a normal feature at this time of year, the Intertropical Conversion Zone, would be striking our territory and had the potential for giving us 3 to 4 days of rain. It wasn't a storm environment, there wasn't a wind associated with it, so it wasn't regarded as storm. But rain was predicted, and we expected and were warned of potential for riverine flooding. Well, unfortunately, it turned out to be a very good forecast, because the forecast was fairly accurate, and we have been under fairly consistent rain for the last few days. What we have been told by the Met Office is that the normal amount of rain that would fall in the month of October would be in the order of less than 250 millimeters in this for October. With a third of the month still to go, we had in 4 days more rain than we would have had for the entire month in a normal time. So it certainly isn't a normal situation. This heavy rainfall and this persistent rainfall over the last few days was confined largely to the northern and eastern part of the country, from about Bamboo all the way up to Sangre Grande and around the northern part of the country on the north coast from Toko to Maraval. All the watercourses in this section of the country and going south to Mayaro have been affected, and most of these watercourses, especially where the river is coursing through flat or low-lying area, have become swollen and overflowed their banks and flowed into built-up areas, resulting in dangerous levels of water rising very quickly in the areas south of La Joqueta and in Sangre Grande. Those two areas suffered the worst from my observation and from the reports. We monitored the situation all night last night. Minister Sinanan was out all night last night in the La Joqueta area, monitoring what was going on in that area. Minister Kazim Hussein was monitoring the southern area, and Minister Young was out and about and in the air first thing this morning. I monitored with them and joined them early this morning, and we went to the areas that were severely hit. I would think that we were lucky from the stories that were reported to me that we, so far, I have no confirmed or official report of any casualty, so we can be thankful for that. And the first responders, which are the regional corporations, either were on standby and treating with the minor matters or major matters. All the corporations were put on standby, and then the Defense Force, Coast Guard in particular, and the police were out doing what they were expected to do. I want to commend the staff in all of these areas, those first responders and those who went into action to save people's lives, because very quickly many of the roadways became impassable and families and communities were marooned in rising water. And you had situations of children and the elderly not being able to look after themselves, and in many instances the Coast Guard and Fire Service, I'm told, use small craft, small boats, small inflatable boats to get along the streets, which became waterways, and got to some houses and actually saved people who were facing conditions of being overwhelmed by the rising water. So they worked in that way, and we had very good results. And we had to open some shelters in some of the areas in La Joqueta and Arima, Sangre Grande. We opened shelters because many persons had to abandon their homes, and these shelters were open, and the relevant authorities and staff members were able to provide items of comfort for them, The ODPM provided the cots and some blankets, and the community, I must say, in the communities that were directly affected in this way, many of the instances of first response was the community itself, and that was a very good thing. And there were persons who were in a position to help from their own resources outside of the state's preparations, and those persons should be thanked and commended because they came very quickly, making available to some of these communities from supermarkets and from households. So together the response overall was quite good, and where there were shortages, we were able to pitch in and satisfy the shortages. In some of the, for example, we opened a shelter in the community center in La Joqueta, and people who came through the muddy water quickly wanted to have a bath or something like that, and they are out of water. So we had to get water into them, and then drinking water had to be made available by daybreak. They had to get some breakfast to some people. Lots of people had small children and babies, and their needs had to be met. We had one instance in Sangre Grande where, unfortunately, the report was that there were some persons who were organizing themselves to break the law. The police responded and stayed on the job throughout the night. So the reports of potential looting did not materialize, and I'm very grateful for that. We do have one particular community which is virtually emptied. That's the Greenvale community. Most persons in that area, even those who have stayed in, are pretty much locked in. Their water levels are still high in some houses, and we have to make a decision this evening as to how we treat that community to protect property in the face of the darkness that's going to come in there, because I'm told that we cannot re-energize the area because of the amount of water that's in the household. By and large, we have the systems in place. We're waiting for the water to drain off where it has not already drained off. In some areas it's draining off fairly quickly. In other areas, because it's moving from one area to another, the area Kelly and St. Helena, from this morning the water levels were too high for us to even go in without going by boat. So some people were able to fly over and some came to the edges, but we have been monitoring them throughout, but their levels are still quite high, and then the water moved further west and affected the highway to San Fernando, which is now impassable. And the ministers will tell you what the story is on those, and Minister Critchlow will tell the population what is in store once the water has drained off. So I would like to just thank all the first responders and second and third and fourth responders. I want to thank the Commissioner of Police and his men and women out there, CDF and the staff, ODPM, and particularly I want to thank the members of the communities who were not in any organized arrangement but able on their own to volunteer their assistance to people who are in distress. And I want to give all those who have been affected the commitment from the government that we will do all that is affordable and all that we are able to do to bring you back to a state of normalcy as quickly as possible. And while you are in shelters, we will make sure that your condition is as comfortable as possible. So I would like to pass the microphone on to Minister Young, who will speak on from his national security side, and then Minister of Works, then Minister of Health, and then the Minister of Social and Family Services.
Thank you.
And of course the Minister of Local Government.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. As you all have heard the Prime Minister give you all an update on what took place during the course of today with the various interrelated relationships of the various ministries you see represented here. What I'm really going to do is provide an update, because along with ODPM, I did a fly through once again of the affected areas this afternoon. So, and that fly through was to do an assessment of the current conditions. What we saw was that water had started to recede, but of course with the rising tide, it was not receding as quickly as maybe we would have liked, but it allowed some more rescuing to take place. And I'd just like people to understand that we have been doing all that we can, not only with the resources that we have, but also the personnel. And I join with the Prime Minister in thanking the TTDF, including the Coast Guard, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, ODPM, the SSA, the fire services, and all of those who assisted. So this afternoon when we're flying through, we actually came down in St. Helena, the St. Helena Junction, and the regiment was there along with the Coast Guard, dispensing boats to go out and try and find and locate people and help them. But the waters were still high. Again, I use the opportunity to ask people, unless you absolutely have to be on the roads, please stay off the roads. We did see a number of cars that had to be abandoned. We had to go down with the helicopter quite low to ensure that no one were in these cars, etc. It is a very difficult exercise. And then again, during the course of the day, you're getting a lot of information coming at you. I understand there's a particular incident when I addressed you all earlier today, where the information we had been provided on social media, we had actually done a fly-through along the Madras Road. We could not find the person who's been located. I saw subsequently after the press conference, later in the afternoon on social media, a suggestion that the lady had been found. I am glad that anyone who needed to be rescued, and that particular lady was found along with her children at the time. Before coming to the conference, we did all that we possibly could. We were making calls. I ensured that ODPM called in front of me at least 4 or 5 occasions before coming to the press conference. And we had, as I said, did a fly-through. As the Prime Minister said, and we've just confirmed along with all our law enforcement on the ground, so far there are no casualties, there are no fatalities. But I can tell you, on the roadway, and this is now the roadway in particular to south and up to north, the Uriah Butler Highway, it is still covered in water. Both the Commissioner of Police and the Minister of Works are looking at the situation. The water is receding. The southern lane will take a while to recede, and they are going to take a decision in the next few hours as to the potential reopening of the highway in the next few hours. Minister Sinanan can talk to that in conversation with the Chief of Defence Staff and the Commissioner of Police as to the particular Greenvale area that the Prime Minister spoke about. Again, we landed the helicopter in there this afternoon. The water is still at a high level. We have had to cut off all of the electricity because the electricity in that particular residential area is underground. So they're not above ground in the poles. And that increases the risk of persons being electrocuted. So we have taken a decision to keep the electricity off, and quite frankly, until the water recedes and goes and TNTEC goes in and gives the clearance, it's going to be that situation. The police are on the ground there. The Commissioner of Police is very aware of it. We're monitoring the situation. It is likely that a decision will be taken overnight that persons who have no need to be in there should not be in there, and a 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., even though it's after 6 p.m. now, I'll leave that for the Commissioner to decide. It may become a no-go zone. There are residents who have remained in their homes and don't want to leave. The police are going to be there and will have the right, obviously, to ask persons what business they have there, etc. We have increased the police service and police force in all of these flood-prone areas and other adjoining areas. I can tell you we saw the waters receding in Sangre Grande. St. Helena still had quite a bit of water. Kelly Village had quite a bit of water. Las Lomas had quite a bit of water, the Madras Road. And what I'm going to end by asking and appealing to people, please stay off the road still, because we're still seeing people. When we were flying over this afternoon, I was disheartened to see there were still certain people trying to make their way through and getting stuck in the floodwaters, and then it becomes an effort to rescue them because the own responder vehicles can't get there to them, and we have to get boats and this type of thing. It is a very dangerous situation. I'm happy to say that as soon as any of the ministries were asked for help, they immediately responded, and I'll leave my colleagues to speak about that. We continue to monitor the weather. We expect there to continue to be rainfall all the way on through to Monday. Thankfully, it hasn't been heavy as was being predicted. We hope that holds up. I can tell you all that in our flyby this afternoon, we went as far south as Debe and Pinal. Everything was fine down there. There has been no flooding down in those areas. There was no evidence of any flooding taking place, and we hope it stays that way. And right now, we continue to focus on the areas that we're at, where the flooding has taken place. The numbers have been released during the course of the day. Once again, we're in the nightfall area where it becomes a bit more difficult to respond, and we're hoping that the vast majority of people who needed emergency rescuing, that was done during the course of daylight today. But we continue to work. ODPM is coordinating everything and deploying resources. And I continue to thank the men and women of law enforcement in Trinidad and Tobago and all those persons who have volunteered and are doing human service in the national security arena. I really appreciate it.
Yes, good evening to all. I would just like to report on the activities at the Ministry of Works and Transport and to give a brief update as to what we have been doing over the past 3 days. In St. George West District, we would have had some fallen trees. This is on the North Coast Road, and some landslips along the roadway that have been cleared. And in some areas, although it's single lane traffic, vehicles can proceed. In the St. George East District, the Heights of Aripo, we had 5 landslips. Again, they have been cleared. In the Arima Blanchard area, the fallen trees, those have been cleared. Basically, our team is out there, and in areas where we have landslips and fallen trees, we clear those immediately. Where we have water of a level where it is impossible to actually go in and see what is happening, we have to wait for the water to subside. However, in most areas, Sani Grande, in the Manzalina area, in the North Oropuch Fishing Pond area, we are seeing the water subside in Sani Grande, in the Manzalina area, and the water have started to subside in the North Oropuch area. On the Konapo Southern Main Road, there have been several landslips and blockage. Again, the ministry would have cleared all the landslips so far, so the road is passable. In the Caroni District, the Uriah Butler Highway, we do have some flooding in that area. However, the ministry would have put the relevant signage and so in place. We are monitoring the northbound lane at this point in time. Once we feel comfortable that motor cars can pass, then we will open that highway. We anticipate between 10 and 12 o'clock tonight, the water should be at a level that will allow the commuters to use the highway, because on the northbound we would have, yes. We do have a lot of commuters at the Grand Bazaar interchange. We are not allowing anyone to go on the highway at this point in time until the Highways Division is satisfied that you can proceed safely. In the Caroni area, we do have some challenges in the Warrenville area, St. Helena and so, but the team is out there and they're monitoring the operations there. We're pretty comfortable with the fact that the water has been receding, and more emphasis will be placed once the water have been cleared to go back in and revisit the water course. And so we're monitoring all the bridges again to make sure that if any debris that would have been brought down by the excessive rain will be cleared as soon as we can get in with the equipment. So the entire staff, all the divisions at the ministry are on standby. They're out there, they're trying to get as much work as possible done. However, once that water level remains at high, it is virtually impossible to go in and have anything done. But if there are any areas that citizens see clogged water courses, bridges that have been blocked with bamboo, things like that, please get that information to our team, and we will have that cleared to ensure that no additional flooding occurs unnecessarily. Thank you.
Good evening to everyone. We at the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government are the first responders to any disaster that takes place in the country. I want to commend the mayors, the chairmen, the aldermen, the councils, the CEOs, the administrative arm, and especially the disaster management coordinators in each corporation. From as early as yesterday evening, they were on the field looking to make sure that everyone has all the equipment ready for use What happened this year is that the corporations that weren't affected, they lent their vehicles to the corporations that was affected. The corporations that were affected were the Sangre Grande Corporation, the Tunapuna Corporation, the Mayaro Corporation, the Couva Talparo Corporation, and the Arima Borough to a lesser extent, but they were affected. What I want to say, especially today, is to the volunteers that came out. I have been on the field all day. Contractors came out, they gave their backhoes, their trucks, people in the community. We helped Charan get to safe places. Homes were flooded out, much as 5 feet of water in the St. Helena area, the El Carmen area. Sangre Grande was the same thing. Before I came here, we had to rescue a pregnant lady. She supposed to be due anytime before the end of the month. She was very happy. We took her straight to the health facility. We continue to monitor the situation. As soon as the water starts to subside, we will get the corporations out in full force together with the assistance of the CPEP contractors to help clean the community and bring it back to normalcy. So once again, I want to thank you all for helping us in the community to help you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Honorable Prime Minister, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen of the media. Let me give you an update about the health response, the challenges, and what we have been able to do and what we are going to do. We focus today as a first responder in health in the areas that needed us most. Those areas would have been St. Helena, Madras, La Joquita, Greenville. What we did today under the auspices of the Acting Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Paratap Singh, and the North Central Regional Health Authority, we turned the La Joquita Health Center into an advanced medical post. We opened the Aruca Health Center and the La Joquita Health Center. These facilities were able to cover the needs of patients from St. Helena, Madras, Urupun, Kelly Village, and surrounding areas that were most impacted today. For the southern areas that were not impacted, but still people are anxious, and for people in central Trinidad who are impacted, the Couva District Health Facility will remain open on a 24/7-hour basis. Princestown District Health Facility open 24/7, and Superior Health Facility will remain open on a 24/7 basis. We did have some challenges up at Sangre Grande. The Sangre Grande Hospital, while not directly affected, was literally cut off due to flood waters. When last I spoke to the media, they were cut off. As of 3:30 this afternoon, they were now accessible via Foster Road, so that is good. So the Sangre Grande General Hospital is now accessible via Foster Road and will be more accessible as flood waters recede. For the northeast areas, Toco and so on, the Toco Health Facility will be open 24/7. The Valencia Outreach open 24/7. The Grand Riviere Outreach will be open on a limited basis. For people down in Mayaro, because Mayaro was particularly hit hard, the Mayaro District Health Facility by the market there is up and running and will be open 24/7. The Rio Claro Health Center will be open 24/7, and the Brothers Road facility will have extended hours until around 5-6 p.m. What we are also doing is that as different health centers and different parts of the country have to cope with a surge, we will be opening tomorrow, if needed, health centers under the Northwest RHA if needed. So Pitti Valley will be open if needed, but we will be opening Salmo Health Center and the St. James District Health Facility. Because as more people use the facilities under North Central and Eastern, we may have to have surge capacity under North Central to cope with that. As the floodwaters subside, our focus on health then shifts to mitigating against floodborne disease. And that is where our biggest challenge is going to come in. So we are urging people to avoid floodwaters as far as humanly possible. If you have to save your life and save yourself and save your property, go into floodwaters. But I saw a picture on the papers this morning with children actually riding through floodwaters and playing. Please avoid that. Keep children out of floodwaters. We don't want people to get leptospirosis and other waterborne diseases. Other waterborne diseases that we have to be careful for are things like diarrhea, gastrointestinal upset, especially for the young and the elderly who could get dehydrated very quickly and turn from a benign condition into a very serious condition. What we will be doing once floodwaters start to subside, we will have medical teams rotating amongst the centers that are conducting emergency work. We will have the nurses, the district health visitors up and about, public health inspectors, because what becomes crucial now is how we deal with solid waste, how we deal with food preparation, and how we deal with water. A key issue now is water. And I want to alert the country that the water you drink must be sterilized. If you don't have access to bottled water and you don't really trust the municipal water at this point in time, boil your water, boil it properly for at least 15 minutes, let it cool. If you can't do that, household bleach can be used. The concentrations for household bleach is on the back of all bleach containers, but clean drinking water in the aftermath of a disaster like this becomes key. It is our #1 public health priority. So please either boil your water, especially for infant formula if you are feeding your children. Food preparation becomes important. Do not use fruits and vegetables that have been immersed in floodwaters. Even canned goods, wash canned goods properly with soap and water before you use them to cook. So we are urging people now, as we shift from emergency medical treatment to how you deal with this in your homes with food and water preparation and floodborne diseases. So our public health inspectors will be out as soon as possible, visiting food premises, visiting groceries, and so on. So that's an update in what the health response has been, prioritizing the areas that needed our help today. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Ministry of Social Development and Family Services acts as a second responder in instances like this. But at this point in time, we are ready and we are prepared to go into all of the affected areas. We know a number of our citizens would have experienced damage to their property, and there are 3 grants that are available to them: one for structural repairs, one for sanitary plumbing, and one for electrical repairs. So there are 3 different grants that are available to them to help bring their unit back to normalcy. In terms of food support, today we were out, even though we are second responders, in instances where people are at shelters, we were out there, we provided food, we provided water, and in terms of food, a hot meal. We were able to provide a hot meal, we provided bottled water, and in instances where persons... Okay. Okay. And in instances where persons are still in their homes, we would have gone to their homes and we were able to provide food and water. In terms of replacement of household furniture and appliances, the ministry is ready to provide grants to replace household items such as living room sets, dining room sets, refrigerators, stove, mattresses, beds. We are ready, we are mobilized, and we are just waiting for the water to subside and for us to go in to do the assessment and have the checks prepared so that those things could be replaced. In terms of school supplies, where there are children in the household who would have lost school books, school uniforms, for primary level students, we'll be providing a grant of $700, and for secondary, a grant of $1,000. And for all members of the household who would have lost all of their clothing, we will provide a grant of $1,000 to each individual within the household. So the ministry is ready. We are just waiting to go in. Today, we had 2 counselors at the La Hoketa Community Center, and they provided psychosocial support and counseling to the persons present. While I was there, almost everybody who was present made use of the counseling, because we recognize that this would have been a traumatic experience for most persons who would have been flooded out. So we are ready and available to provide that psychosocial support to the persons who were affected. So once again, I want to assure the citizens and residents of Trinidad and Tobago that the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services stands ready to provide all of the disaster relief and support that they require. Thank you.
I just want to remind citizens that even as we are going through this difficult period, it is very important for us to observe law and order, and the defense force and the police would be out there to ensure that there is no undue deviation from that. The police has been out and will continue to be out and will be reinforced in areas that are vulnerable. And I want to appeal to those citizens who might be so minded not to seek to take advantage of others who are distressed at this time. The police service and the defense staff, meaning the Army and the Coast Guard, would not tolerate, and the country ought not to tolerate, persons who seek to use this as an opportunity to further distress persons who may have had to abandon their home or their business. We all in this together, and fortunately those who are on the outside, on the dry side, should be reaching out to lend a helping hand to those who have been distressed. I also want to mention that the grants that are available from the Ministry of Social Services and Family Affairs are not to be abused. The public service staff will come in and confirm very quickly, that you have a need, and once you have a need because you have been affected, you qualify, and once you qualify, we'll get those grants to you as quickly as possible. And we'll try to ensure that that opportunity that is made available to those who have been affected is not abused, because even if we have a lot of money, we have to minimize or eliminate abuse. I could speak ahead of the cabinet here now, in that the last time we had a disaster almost like this was in the southwestern corner of the country when we had that last flood. It appears as though from the distribution of the effect that this might cost us more money, because it may be that more people are affected and affected more completely. So I would speak ahead of the cabinet here and indicate that I would ask cabinet on Thursday to approve and authorize $25 million initially, if that is what is required, to assist persons who are going to require assistance from the Treasury, and we'll ensure that that money is properly spent and spent as quickly as possible on those persons who have been affected. The staff is on standby. Much as we'd like to help immediately, for that to kick in, we have to wait until the water would have subsided, and then the next assignment would be to clean and make safe and healthy, and then rebuild and restore. So that is where we are, and hopefully the forecast that says that this will last for another 2 days would not bring us the kinds of rains that we've had, because if that happens, then you can understand what's going to happen. I think those who have been praying, they could take comfort in the fact that they've prayed and our prayers have been answered, that this afternoon, even though the clouds had got very heavy mid-afternoon, we did not experience rainfall as those clouds had indicated was possible. We will keep observing and listening to the Met Office and being guided by them. So we will still, the ODPM, the Chief of Defence Staff and these people, the police and all staff, men and women, their fire services, all first responders and corporations, we are still on standby until this weather system passes. Until the Met Office give us the all clear that the weather system has passed, we are still exposed. And we will do the best we can. And this group of ministers and the military arms and paramilitary arms will be there to provide support and succor to those persons who are directly affected. I finally want again to commend and to thank those persons who are lending their assistance in any way out there, equipment and food and personal assistance in any way, because your contribution is what's going to make this a success in the end. And just ask people, if you're not affected, don't go into the affected areas unless you really have to. If the area is still underwater, try and not go in there. And I want, if there are questions from the media, we'll take a few questions now.
Good evening. This question is for anyone who thinks they're best suited to answer it. Any of the, looking at the affected areas, any remain inaccessible as of right now, and where are people still marooned?
We still have people marooned in the Kelly, St. Helena area and in some areas around Sangre Grande. And the reason for that is that because of how the water has come, the roadways are covered by water as high as 5 feet. In fact, last night some of those roadways had as high as 7 feet of water. And once the roadways are like that, you can only access the communities and the houses by boat. And the persons who are not underwater, even though the roadways are like that, those persons are still in those communities and are therefore to be deemed to be marooned. And they have to wait until the water goes down and the roadways come back into operation. And if there are emergencies, we get to them by the inflatable craft that the Coast Guard and fire services might be using. In Sangre Grande is a very peculiar town. I don't know if you all are familiar with Sangre Grande. Sangre Grande is largely surrounded by meandering rivers. And a very funny thing was happening today is that the overflow from one river, the Kunapa River, the overflow from that river was getting out across Sangre Grande and making its way into another river that's overflowing. So the Oropouche River and the Kunapa River, both the rivers were swollen and overflowing, and the town of Sangre Grande is wrapped inside of those loops. So until those rivers go down, the roadways and some of the houses in Sangre Grande will remain underwater. And as I said earlier on, even some of the shelter areas, the designated shelters, were underwater. And I was told that we have 13 families in shelter at the Civic Center, which is the highest point in the town. So we are hoping that we get no more rain. We are experiencing high tide now, and that will slow down the drain off for a while. But with the change of the tide, we expect that the drain off would accelerate. So within the next 24 hours, much of what is underwater now should have drained off if we don't get additional rains. So that's what we are observing and looking forward to going forward into the next 12 to 24 hours.
There was a concern by people in Kelly and St. Helena that they felt almost abandoned, like they felt like the priority and the resources were spent elsewhere, and they were wondering, well, why are we waiting so long? Why are we stranded for so long? And we are seeing on the internet, we're seeing first responders elsewhere, and we're right here, and nobody's coming for us.
Well, first responders to St. Helena and Kelly could only have been by the boats. And we did have boats in the area. In fact, we brought inflatables from South Trinidad to make sure that we had people in there. And we didn't want people just going in there and sightseeing. The people who were in there were trained officers from the Coast Guard, and if there were people in distress, if these people were in their homes and they were not threatened as people in Greenvale were. In the case of Greenvale, they were threatened in the case of life and death. And also, we could have accessed Greenvale from La Joqueta. The roadways there were clear. Sangre Grande, we could access from where the road allowed us to access. And of course, by midday, we couldn't access San Fernando by road. So I don't think that people should believe that they were being ignored or being given less attention. It is what the circumstances call for and warranted. And as I say, because of where St. Helena and Kelly and Warren, they are right on the banks of the Caroni River, which is the main course, accepting water from all around. So as the water is receding in the tributaries, it's not yet receding in the Caroni River. The high tide is still holding Caroni high. When that drains off, we will be able to do much more by presence in those areas. And from those who have gone by air and by water, reporting back as to what is happening in St. Helena and Kelly, we know they are distressed, we know they are underwater largely, but we are having to wait until the water goes down. And if there are supplies to be taken to them, for second responders would get there, and the defense force and the police.
I could assist with that, Prime Minister. This evening when we did the second fly-in, both St. Helena and Kelly Village, in fact, we tried to touch down near to the St. Helena Junction, the ministers were there as well, and there were heavy equipment from the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment, as well as Coast Guard, the vessels, the marine vessels that the Prime Minister has spoken about, and that was taking place. You had to do a proper assessment. It was a lot more difficult terrain because of how spread out and the fact that all of the secondary roads coming in those two villages were under heavy water. So it wasn't like Greenville area that was a housing settlement that you go in and is a limited amount of resources, etc. But the resources were there, I can testify to that, and they were working and they will continue to work.
Unfortunately, I must say though that it matters not what we do. There are some people who will say the worst, but I think we're familiar with those. What I want to say is that the people who are on the job in these situations, I would like to think that they are doing their very best. I've met officers today who were up all through the night and into the day. Such persons will not say thanks to them. Granted that they're officers on the job, but they are doing what they're required to do. And I'm not surprised that some people will say that, but we really have to look at it in an overall situation. And I think overall that we are putting the resources that we have available. We don't have unlimited resources. In fact, in some situations we have to admit that we don't have the resources that will allow us to, we probably would like to have many more boats and many more trained people to go in those boats, because untrained people in boats going into raging flood waters, that's another kind of problem. And as I said that, let me say something else too. This morning as I got out of the vehicle, early morning, at the very first location I went to, the first person who came to talk to me in distress was to report to me that there were 13 people dead, of which 6 were electrocuted and the others were drowned. And that person was literally going through the trauma of that. Fortunately, I did not take that from that. I went to the officer who was in charge, a Coast Guard officer who was in charge of the operation, and what was the official situation. And the official situation was we have no reports of casualty. So some people, either through emotion or whatever, get into spreading misinformation, and others just malicious and mischievous, spreading fake news. And I'm just asking them to desist, because you're not helping. That is hurting people, because people receiving news about deaths and so. Even by the time I was leaving Lahoketa, there was one gentleman who was convinced that he saw somebody who was drowned. We can't say no to him until the water has drained off, because he's saying that he saw somebody who was drowned. Those who were in the area, the officials who were in the area, can't confirm it. So we're hoping that those bits of news are not realized, but the whole area being underwater, we would not be entirely surprised if some person perished who will not be there. But as we speak to you now, we have no proper reports that those bits of information. And people who are in the dry areas, please, if you don't know firsthand, don't try spreading information about people's condition who are in the flood areas, because your misinformation and your fake news can only help to disturb and to hurt.
I just want to ask the statement about the feelings of the people in the Kelly Warren. Both myself and the Minister of Rural Development, I spent about 6 hours today from Warrenville, Kelly, St. Helena, and El Carmen, and we went into all the areas. We went in with the boats, and present in those areas were the Coast Guards, the Air Guard, the regiment, even the customs and excise division were inside there. Again, because of the level of the water, the people in there had to be trained people, and they were all in there together with some professionals, volunteers, who actually came in, and I mean, they were visiting every household in the area.
The only area that we left, which I understand that from the reports that came in early, had some effect of flooding, but the first responders in that area indicated that, you know, they had it under control. That was the Mafeking area in the Mayaro Corporation, where there was some overflow in that area. We're familiar with what happens with the river around there. And Rio Claro was threatened at one stage, but then the reports were that the roads were open on Rio Claro, so therefore there was no need to ramp up anything there. But the banks of the Mafeking River, that river which Mafeking is on, they had some water in the village there, but it wasn't anywhere as threatening as it was in the Greenvale and Kelly areas. So I don't know that we should accept that persons have been left unattended. All corporations from Diego Martin to Sangui Gandhi and the Tobago House of Assembly, they were all on alert to be the first responders with respect to what happens in their district.
I heard this statement twice today from yourself and the Minister of Transport during some interviews where he said that, you know, some people build in flood-prone areas, but two of the worst hit areas were HDC settlements, which means the state would have chosen to build there.
Yes, and if you look around, one of the heaviest floods we ever had in this country, damaging our community, was Diamond Vale. I don't know if you recall the Great Diamond Vale flood in the 60s, I think it was, when the entire Diamond Vale was flooded, and that was when Diamond Vale was a state. The trouble is that if you look at the physiography of the country, we have the highlands, north, central, south, and in between you have the lowlands. People have to live somewhere, but what we do have, either from planned settlements like Greenvale and other areas, sometimes we occupy areas which, if we had other areas which were completely, which were perfect, we wouldn't occupy these areas. But many areas in Trinidad in particular are built in either low-lying flat areas or in areas which can be reclaimed by a river in a watercourse. Sometimes it happens once every 10, 15, 20 years. Sometimes for years the area would be okay, but then you get the 20-year rainfall or the 20-year flood and the area goes underwater. This is not unique to us here in Trinidad and Tobago. If you look at the United States, the Mississippi Valley, the Missouri Valley, millions of people, tens of millions of people live in that valley. But every so often, nature takes its course, the river is flooding, and water would flood from Missouri all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And then we just have to deal with it. But what we have to do, though, to minimize this kind of effect is in planning, try as far as we are able to not build in areas that are flood prone or minimize the occupancy of that. And also in the unplanned areas, try and discourage people from building in areas which have a very high propensity for flooding. Unfortunately, even if we start today to enforce that in the most rigorous of ways, we already have tens of thousands of persons who have occupied areas which have a propensity to be exposed to flooding when we have excess rainfall. That is the distribution of population. In South, Central, and Northern Trinidad, we have that issue. Tobago, where the slopes are a little steeper, we don't have very much flat plain in Tobago, so Tobago rivers tend to flow off, drain off very quickly, and the water tends to be confined within narrow river channels, so you don't get widespread flooding in Tobago. But in Trinidad, there are many areas which are very highly developed, which are in fact areas, if you look at it from a geographical standpoint, are the water catchment areas and where the excess water will flow over in a normal situation. And if you go there now, you have roads, you have houses, you have people. And then of course, when it floods like this, these people are very heavily affected, and we just have to wait for, even with the best of drainage in those areas, when it's overcome like by this, the only thing you can do is to wait for the water to drain off. And that's how we occupy the islands. But we really have to, whenever these things happen like today, take it into account into the planning, and as we go forward, learn from what we have done before and try and not worsen the situation going forward.
In terms of the assessment, should Turkey hold on to their damaged items until they are assessed?
Yes, I mean, if you're going to claim that you had a fridge or a bed that has been destroyed, somebody's going to come from the government side to confirm, because you know that there are some people who will make claims that cannot be verified. And this is taxpayers' money. All of us are contributing, and we have to make sure that the people who have been affected are the ones that we're providing this money to. So what happens is that the officers will come around, they will see which areas have been affected, and people will show them what they've experienced, and the officers will verify that these persons have qualified, because if you have not been affected in certain ways, you won't qualify for these grants. So at least in the first few days, when you've got organized and it's been confirmed, and then after that you have the general cleanup.
What about the tertiary students? You made mention of primary and secondary school students, $700 for primary, $1,000 for secondary.
In terms of what applies to secondary would also apply to tertiary level students. So that would be the $1,000.
Well, the Prime Minister answered one of the questions that $25 million immediately would be given for that. Also, going back on your last point, Mr. Prime Minister, you made mention again of, and you spoke about it as well in La Hoqueta, with regards to there's not much that could be done in terms of drainage. But
no, I didn't say that. I didn't say, there's always something that you can do to improve a situation. So I don't want to be the drainage engineer here. The drainage issues, La Hoqueta and Greenvale, these are planned communities built by the state, and they would have had certain drainage issues, but whatever they had would have been overcome by what has happened in the last 4 days. And in some instances, you may find that what we have learned here might indicate that there's more that we can do with respect to drainage in those areas.
Mr. Sinanan, this is not the first time you would have said something like this, that people are constructing near the riverbanks. The Prime Minister just said, even if we were to enforce these laws that exist now, there would still be people there that would be affected. Going forward, what, if anything, would or could be done to ensure that these developers don't develop near the near riverbanks?
This is a situation that exists in Trinidad for quite a while, and we are working with the Ministry of Planning and Development to try to enforce the existing laws. You cannot build on a riverbank. The challenge we have is the enforcement, and we are working with the Ministry of Planning and also the Ministry of Agriculture to ensure that we bring some sort of normalcy as to where people. The challenge is not they just build on the riverbank. We have people actually moving out material from the riverbanks to actually level and to get a plateau. And that in itself causes a lot of problems. You remember last year, around the same time, when similar floods took place in the Caroni area, the residents started to point out to us who were the residents that were removing the dirt from the Caroni River. This year we have the Caroni River breaching in several different areas. And I wonder if some of those breaches were not as a result of some of the delinquent residents removing dirt from the riverbank. Bearing in mind this rainfall was not really a normal rainfall period.
As it is now, what's the penalty for those developers?
I don't have the penalty. in terms of a quantum for that. But I'm sure through the Ministry of Planning and Development, they will have some penalties for infringement of the building codes in Trinidad and Tobago.
Now, anyone on the table, you made mention of residents. What about farmers, particularly in the Central Division?
The only farming area which has been affected and formed part of the first response requirements that I'm aware of is the El Carmen area and in Arang West South, they would have been affected, but in the next few days, we'll get a better picture as to what went on there. Initially, when you come out in situations like this, we tend to have to focus on life and limb situations. So in the coming day or two, we'll get a better picture there. Let me just say something about this question about building in unsuitable areas. Trinidad and Tobago, the cultural arrangement here, even with law enforcement, this is the culture of how you're going to demand that. Understood? People will be seen to be doing things which are wrong, but the weather is fair, how you're going to demand that. But what the person is doing has the potential to cause disaster for others. And if you enforce the law, the view is that that's a small thing. But these small things have a way. If people are so uncooperative as to be removing material, earthen material from the banks of the Caroni River. The Caroni River has levees. When you dredge it, you take out the earth from at the bottom of the river, and you make banks on both sides, and that allows the river to carry more water because it becomes like a barrier where the river can rise higher without flooding. Those levees are to protect the community around, to allow the water to go out. If you weaken them by extracting material from there to raise an area away from the levee, that has the potential of allowing the river to breach those levees. And once you get one breach, significant volumes of water would now, instead of going through the river course down to the sea, would now be coming inland through the breaches. And of course, I can't recall ever hearing anybody being prosecuted for that. I'm hearing the minister saying now that they've pointed out people who have been doing that. Now, if somebody is doing that, such a person should feel the full brunt of the law. But I can't recall hearing anybody being prosecuted for something like that, which in a normal sunny day would be no big thing. But it's a big thing because you're doing something that risks even the life of people who might be caught up in the flood when the river breaches the levee. And of course, I had an instance when I was Minister of Planning in Maraval, where someone had built so close to his neighbor that the runoff from his roof was affecting the neighbor. And the neighbor complained to the Ministry of Planning. And the Ministry of Planning took legal action against that person. And miraculously, the person won the case. I mean, only yesterday I was talking about that. Then you building on an approved building lot, but building so close and in violation of the requirement to stay a certain way from your own boundary, but building, trying to maximize the size of your house, that the runoff from a roof was affecting the neighbor's property. And you could afford to go to court and argue and win the case. So we just have to understand that to get the best of what we are living with, there's a requirement to have laws, and we have plenty of laws in this country. But there's a second requirement to enforce the laws. Because having laws without enforcement is like not having them. And in this occupancy of land and flooding and so on, it is one of the areas where we have the least amount of law enforcement in Trinidad and Tobago.
Until now, from now on going forward, we would see.
Well, even if yes, I would like that to be so, but I'm saying, as I said earlier on, even if we enforce it now, we already have large communities that are already in occupancy of areas which, in hindsight, ought not to have been occupied in that way. But we have now to treat with that, and those areas are prone to flooding. And even so, we can't guarantee that where we've chosen the best areas, that there wouldn't be situations where, like you get a thunder shower over Maraval, over Diego Martin, and the Diego Martin River will flood. And many good areas can come underwater. So we have to understand that these are part of our environment, and we do the best that we can with them.
What's that?
Monday, as far as you're able to, Monday is a working day, and as only for those, I mean, I'm not going to make any declaration here other than that. If persons find themselves in extreme conditions where they can't get out, or they have lost the means of getting to work, well, then we have to be reasonable. But Monday is a working day for all of us. And those people who are in shelters and elsewhere, they are relying on people coming out to work on Monday and Sunday, because it is those persons who are at work who will bring relief and comfort to those persons.
What about some of these schools that are being used as shelters?
I have only heard of one school that was earmarked for a shelter in La Hoqueta. And if a school is a shelter, well, then that changes and hopefully that will only one. If a school is a shelter, well, that will make different arrangements come into play for the children, parents, and teachers there.
What I just want to add is we have tomorrow. So one of the things, it doesn't stop tonight. So all of the assessments continue tomorrow. All of the work continues tomorrow. Obviously, these two issues that you've just raised are things that we will be looking at tomorrow, because we also wouldn't want to, if we can avoid it, disrupt schooling of children, etc. I think you have one question.
Minister Dialson, you mentioned something. You gave a health tip earlier on with using bleach.
Yes.
Could you just revise? Yeah, because I didn't quite get it. I don't want people pouring bleach in their water.
That is not Dr. Dialson. That is Mr. Dialson.
Okay, so let me just recap quickly. In the aftermath of any flooding disaster like we are having, public health, that is situations that could affect tens of thousands of people, public health assumes great importance. Leptospirosis, stay out of flood waters, and so on. The issue with water, potable water, is that if your municipal water supply is compromised, that is WASA, we are asking people to boil water. You boil it for at least 15 minutes to kill all the bacteria, let it cool, and then you could use it for drinking, mixing baby formula, cooking, whatever. Another alternative to sterilize water is you use bleach. On the back of every bleach container, they tell you how many drops of bleach to use per liter of water. And that is a very safe, quick, and inexpensive way of sterilizing water for household use, for cooking and so on. I don't recommend you one with bleach for your baby bottle. Sterilize your water by boiling it, because it does leave you with a slight aftertaste. But I just want to urge people, public health becomes important in the aftermath of a flood. We don't want people coming down with gastroenteritis because you are drinking contaminated water. That is another disaster we don't want to have to cope with. What we also did today at some of the health centers, people who lost their medication, we supplied them again with medication today, especially people with chronic diseases like diabetes, hypertension, asthma, where you have to take medication on a daily basis, 2-3 times a day. So we got C40 open, that's the drug warehouse. That is open, that was not compromised. So the nation's drug supply for the public sector is safe and dry, and we had people dispensing pharmaceuticals to those in need today. And that type of activity will continue.
Thank you very much. I just want to end by saying that we are still in a situation. We are still in the situation. The weather system is still east of us, and we are having to pay attention to it for the next 24 to 48 hours. And all our staff, the nation's staff, and from all the ministries, from minister down, from the office of the Prime Minister, the cabinet, the Chief of Defense Staff, the Commissioner of Police, and all volunteers, we are on the job, and I thank you for being so. Thank you very much, and we look forward to good news as we continue praying for the best in this situation. Thank you very much.